The question came while I was sharpening a hoe by the wash-house door, with the stone making that slow, wet sound against the edge. It was late in the day, and the sun had dropped low enough that the dust in the yard looked golden where it hung in the air. My grandson stood beside the rain barrel with his hat in both hands. He had been quiet longer than a boy usually is. Then he asked me why we Shun family. Not strangers, not some man in the next county, family. And I remember the way my hand stopped on the stone, because for the first time in many years, I did not have an answer ready. My name is Malin. I am an old Amish grandfather, and I have lived under the Ordnung all my life. I have seen it hold people up, and I have seen people stumble beneath the weight of it. I share these memories because a man can carry something for 50 years and still not know the right shape of it until a child asks him plainly. If this matter has ever touched your own family, in any church or any home, I would want to hear how you carried it. My grandson's name is Daniel. He was 16 then, tall in the shoulders but still young in the face, with that look a boy gets when he is old enough to see pain, but not old enough to know where to put it. We had been working in the garden rows since after dinner. The beans were just coming in. The leaves had that sharp green smell when you brushed them, and every time the wind crossed the field, you could hear the corn make its dry, whispering sound, though it was still early in the season. There had been a letter that morning. It came from my daughter Lydia. I will not tell all of her story. Some things belong to the person who lived them. But Lydia was my third child, my quiet one, the girl who could sit by the stove and mend a tear in a shirt so fine you had to look twice to find where it had been. She laughed softly. She moved softly. When she was small, she would follow me to the barn before sunrise and stand there in the doorway with bare feet on the cool boards, waiting for me to hand her the tin measure for feed. When she was grown, she made choices that took her away from our church, not away from us at first. Away from the Ordnung, away from the way we had promised to live. There were meetings. There were visits from the ministry. There were prayers spoken in kitchens where the coffee went cold because nobody remembered to drink it. There were words like repentance and obedience and fellowship. They are not small words, though people sometimes use them like tools they do not feel in their own hands. In time, Lydia was put under the ban. People outside our way hear that and imagine one thing. People inside our way know it is not simple. The ban is not meant to be hatred. That is what I was taught. It is meant as a fence, a warning, a sorrowful thing done for the good of the soul and the good of the church. We do not eat at the same table in fellowship. We do not do business as if nothing has changed. We do not pretend a vow is no vow. That is the teaching. I could have said all that to Daniel. I had said it before, to neighbors, to younger men, and to myself while I hitched the team in the dark. But that day, with the sharpening stone wet in my hand, those words did not rise as quickly as they once had, because the letter that morning had not been from a stranger under discipline. It had been from my child. The paper was thin, and the fold lines were soft, like she had opened and closed it more than once before sending it. My wife Anna found it in the mailbox and laid it on the kitchen table beside the butter dish. She did not open it. She knew the shape of Lydia's hand on an envelope. A mother knows. I sat down before breakfast and read it while the stove still ticked from the morning fire. Lydia wrote that her oldest girl had a baby. My granddaughter, whom I had not seen since she was small enough to fall asleep against my coat, was now a mother herself. Lydia wrote the baby's name. She wrote that the child had dark hair. She wrote that when the baby cried, it sounded just like Lydia had sounded as a newborn, sharp at first and then tired, as if the whole world had already been too much. There was no accusation in the letter. That almost made it harder. She did not write, "Why have you stayed away?" She did not write, "Do you still love me?" She wrote the news of a baby. She wrote that the garden was poor that year. She wrote that she still remembered the smell of Anna's bread cooling on the sideboard. At the end she wrote, "I hope Dad is well." I sat there with that paper in my hand, and I heard Anna moving behind me, setting cups on the table. She was slower by then. Her hands had begun to ache in the mornings. She came and stood near my chair, and after a while she said one line, "A child does not stop being hungry because the door is closed." Then she went back to the stove. That was all she said. Anna was not a woman who argued with the church. She kept her covering straight. She knew the hymns by heart. She had buried 2 babies and never once let bitterness turn her mouth hard in front of the children. But she was Lydia's mother, and there are pains in this world that do not fit neatly inside the words we are given for them. Daniel had seen the letter on the table. He had seen how quiet the house became after breakfast. Children see more than we tell them. Grandchildren see even more, because they are far enough from our old wounds to look at them without flinching. That afternoon while we worked the garden, he asked me first about the baby. Was she his cousin? I said yes. Then he asked if we would visit. I said that was not simple. He pulled weeds for a while after that, slow and careful, laying them roots up in the sun. Then at the wash house door, he asked the question straight. "Daddy, why do we shun family?" I heard a mourning dove in the maple by the lane. I heard water drip from the stone back into the little pail. I heard my own breathing, which sounded older to me than it had that morning. I wanted to tell him what my father would have told me. My father was a firm man, not cruel, firm. When someone was put under the ban in his day, people lowered their voices and accepted it. A child did not ask much. My father would have said the church is not held together by feeling. He would have said obedience is easiest to explain when it is hardest to practice. There is truth in some of that. I will not sit here as an old man and pretend there is no need for boundaries. A community cannot be only soft-hearted and survive. Promises matter. Baptism matters. The way we live together matters. If every person does what seems right in his own eyes, soon there is no plain people left, only memories of them. But Daniel had not asked me about rules only. He asked why we shun family. And family is where every rule has a face. I thought of Lydia at 6 years old, carrying a basket too large for her because she wanted to help. I thought of her standing in the doorway on the day she married, eyes lowered, cheeks red, trying not to smile too much. I thought of the last time she sat at our table, before the distance became official. She had folded her napkin 3 times, then unfolded it again. I remember that more than the words spoken. Her fingers would not keep still. I thought of the baby named in the letter, a child who had done nothing but arrive in this world and cry for warmth. So I told Daniel the truth I had at that moment. I said, I know what I was taught. I am still asking God to teach me how to carry it. That was not the answer a grandfather wants to give. A grandfather wants to be a well with clear water. He wants the young ones to come with their pails and draw something that will help them walk straighter. But sometimes an old man looks down into himself and finds the water troubled. Daniel did not speak right away. He leaned against the wall, and the brim of his hat made a shadow over his eyes. I could see where dirt had dried on his wrist. Boys that age still forget to wash all the way clean. Then he said, do you miss her? That answer came quicker. I said, every day. There are some words that do not need more around them. We stood there a little while. The work was not finished. The rows still needed tending. Supper would need carrying in. The cows would not wait because an old man had found a hard place in his conscience. Life on a farm does not stop for grief. In some ways that is mercy. In some ways it is not. Later, after chores, I went into the barn alone. The air was warm and thick with hay dust. A swallow had built under one beam, and I could hear the small, restless sounds of young birds above me. I sat on an overturned bucket near the empty stall where my old mare used to stand. She had been gone 3 years by then, but I still looked for her sometimes. Habit is a stubborn thing. I took Lydia's letter from my pocket and read it again in the fading light. I did not suddenly decide that everything I had been taught was wrong. That is not how a life changes when you are old. It changes like a fence post loosening in wet ground. One season you think it is firm. Then you lean on it and feel the give. The next Sunday, I watched the families come into meeting. I watched mothers smooth little boys' hair. I watched fathers lift sleeping children down from wagons. I watched young people stand in their separate places and look everywhere except at one another. I listened to the hymns rise without instruments, one slow note after another, the way they have risen for generations. I love that sound. I love our way more than some people would believe. I love the plain benches and the shared meals and the way neighbors arrive before being asked. I love the silence before prayer. I love that a man's word is still expected to weigh something. But love for a way of life does not remove the ache of a missing chair at the table. That is what I could not explain to Daniel with easy words. Shunning is spoken of as discipline, and discipline may have its place. But when the person under discipline is your daughter, the practice enters the kitchen. It sits beside your wife while she kneads bread. It stands at the mailbox. It looks out from an old photograph tucked behind a clock. It is not an idea anymore. It is a name. In the years after that, I learned to speak more carefully. Not weaker, carefully. There is a difference. When young people asked about the ban, I still told them that vows matter. I still told them the church cannot be built on every passing wish. But I also told them that correction without tears becomes pride. I told them never to speak of another family's sorrow as if it were a fence they had built straight. I told them that when someone is outside the circle, we had better be sure we are praying for their return, and not enjoying their absence. That last part matters. A man can hide a hard heart behind obedience. I have done it. I do not say that proudly. I say it because I am too old to polish my own memory now. There were times I felt safer calling Lydia rebellious than admitting I was wounded. There were times I made the rule larger in my mouth because my love for her made me feel helpless. It is a strange thing to love someone and still stand apart from them. Stranger still to tell yourself you are doing it only for their good, when part of you is also protecting yourself from being hurt again. Daniel is a grown man now. He has children of his own. He is steadier than I was at his age, and kinder in ways I had to grow old to learn. Once, not long ago, he brought his little boy to my shop. The child picked up a smooth scrap of walnut and held it like treasure. Daniel looked at me and said, "I remember what I asked you by the wash house." I said, "So do I." He waited, maybe wondering if I had found a better answer in all these years. I told him this: the church must know how to guard what is holy, but a father must never forget the sound of his child's name. That is as close as I have come. Maybe it is not enough for some. Maybe some will say I have gone soft in my old age. Maybe others will say I have not gone soft enough. An old man hears both and keeps walking if he can. What I know is this: the older I get, the less I trust any righteousness that does not leave room for weeping. If a rule can be kept with dry eyes while a daughter is far away, then something in the keeping has become dangerous. If a boundary is needed, let it be held with trembling hands. If a correction must be spoken, let the one who speaks it feel the weight first. And if a grandson asks a question that breaks through all the answers you have practiced, do not be ashamed to stand quiet for a moment. Sometimes that quiet is the most honest thing you have left. I still pray for Lydia. I pray for her children and the child whose name came in that letter. I pray for our church too. Not that it becomes careless, not that it forgets what it promised. I pray that we remember. Mercy is not the enemy of truth. I pray that truth held without mercy does not become something else in our hands. A man can live 70 years and still be learning how to love rightly. That is what my grandson's question taught me. Not that every old teaching must be thrown away. Not that every ache should become a new rule. Only this: when family stands on the other side of discipline, we must be very careful what kind of people we become while we wait. If this story has stirred something in you, I would be grateful if you stayed with me for more of these memories. Subscribe if you want to hear them as I am able to tell them. And tell me, if you can, whether your family ever had a question no one knew how to answer. I read those words with more care than you might think.